Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the webinar, Breakfast After the Bell Basics for Educators. My name is Emily, and I'm going to be managing the back end of the webinar today. So if you have any problems with audio or technical connection, please go ahead and send your issues in the question box, and I'll be able to attend to those individually. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar today, so as those pop up, also send those in the question box, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. If we are not able to answer all of your questions today, we will follow up via email afterwards, and there will be a recording that we will send out as well. The PowerPoint slides are located in the handout section of this webinar on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, so you can access those now, and we'll also send a copy of them out with the webinar recording. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Julie Pittman.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk to you about Breakfast After the Bell, or as we're starting to call it in North Carolina, breakfast is part of the instructional day. This is basics for educators. Traditionally, I'm a school teacher. I teach in Western North Carolina in Rutherford County. I have been an educator in North Carolina for 17 years. And I'm excited this year to actually be working with NoKidHungry and NoKidHungry North Carolina to really work with teachers and principals and schools on how we can use breakfast as part of our instructional day so that we can meet the needs of all of our children from the beginning of the day through the end. I'm also excited to be here with my friend Kelly McDonough, who is with NoKidHungry. So Kelly, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Julie. Hi, my name is Kelly, and I work on the NoKidHungry campaign from our office's headquarters in Washington, D.C., but I support our school breakfast work across the country in a number of states, including North Carolina, and I look forward to talking to y'all more in a few minutes.
So let's get started. This is one of my favorite things to look at and talk about, and I pretty much in my work across the state, know that most teachers know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I think about looking at this in that top triangle. That's my job description. As a school teacher, it's my job to help all of my students self-actualize, to make sure that they are reaching their fullest potential and becoming who they were meant to be. But I can't do that in my classroom unless all of the other levels of Maslow's hierarchy are met. And the base level one is the physiological needs, and that's where food falls. So when my students come to school and they're hungry because they haven't eaten breakfast, or their bus was late and they didn't make it to the cafeteria, or they were running late or had a doctor's appointment, or they didn't have any food in their cabinets at home, I know that I can't help them work through that hierarchy. So it's like putting a roof on a house with no foundation. It's really important that we start our kids off at the beginning of the day with a nutritious meal. And breakfast as part of the instructional day is super important. I'm a high school teacher, so for all of these years that I've been teaching high school, the breakfast has been so important in our school. About 7 years ago, though, we didn't have breakfast as part of our instructional day. Breakfast was served in the cafeteria before school started, and several of our students would come to class and they wouldn't have had breakfast before we got started. So one of my friends who teaches in another state is a principal, and he says that the first 90 minutes of school are the most important to get content into a student's brain. But if students haven't eaten breakfast and they can't concentrate on learning, then really those first 90 minutes, they become unstructured and really unproductive for students and for teachers. So making sure that our students eat at the beginning of the day fuels their brain, it fuels their body, and it allows our students to know that we as educators, that we care for them. We care for them as a whole human being. We really attend to their whole child needs, and we really try to eliminate any barriers to equity, to access, education, nutrition, and opportunity for all of our students. When we include breakfast as part of the instructional day, we allow our students to know that not just getting our content into their brains is important, but making sure that they are healthy, ready to learn, and ready to become really productive citizens is what our intent is. So let's make sure we feed all of our kids breakfast at the beginning of the day. If we look at the next slide, I love this because we can really understand how hunger is an education issue. 3 out of 4 public school teachers say that students come to school regularly hungry. I know that for all of my years of teaching, I always had snacks in the bottom drawer of my desk, and I would allow my students to come into my classroom and eat because a lot of times, let's face it, educators don't like for students to bring food into the classroom, but if we teach them how to really manage their mess or their food in the classroom, then they know that we're not just trying to just teach them the content, we're trying to teach them how to be responsible human beings. We also know that 9 out of 10 teachers say that they're concerned about the long-term effects of hunger on children's education. I know that that's true because I would see students in my class after lunch, and then I would see that they would have wrapped up food in their backpacks, and that I knew they were trying to get food to go home, either for themselves for later or for a snack for an after-school event, or maybe even to feed a younger sibling. So I know that hunger sometimes can really affect how students are behaving in class. But I look at that middle statistic and it stands out so much to me. If you look at this, it's incredible. Standardized math scores increase by 17.5% on average when students regularly start the day with a healthy breakfast. Math test scores are so important across our state, and I know that our boards of education and stakeholders and legislators and policymakers are really concerned about how our students are prepared for math in the real world. So let's get them started with a good breakfast and try to increase those math scores. 1 in 7 kids live in hunger in this country. But the national, and that's an improvement from previous years where it's been 1 in 6. But when you look at North Carolina, it's really been stagnant because in North Carolina, 1 in 5 kids continue to live in hunger or have food insecurity. There's something that we can do about that. And as public educators, I think that we can address it through school nutrition. So I'm really excited that you're joining us here today and that I get to have my friend Kelly talk to you about some of our best practices and what we know to be true for breakfast as part of the instructional day. So Kelly, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Julie. Again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm really excited to be doing this webinar with Julie, who is such a great champion for school breakfast in North Carolina. And we're excited to dive a little bit deeper into the subject of school breakfast and breakfast after the bell with you. But I thought we would get started by talking a little bit more about NoKidHungry. So NoKidHungry is a campaign of Share Our Strength. We are an anti-hunger organization. As I mentioned earlier, we are based in Washington, D.C., but our work touches all 50 states. And we are very invested in North Carolina in ensuring that all kids in North Carolina have the nutritious food that they need to learn, grow, and thrive. In my role with NoKidHungry, I work specifically to provide support around the school breakfast program. So I am here to be a helper to teachers like you that are interested in making sure that their students are connected with school breakfast every day. So when we think about our work here at NoKidHungry, we know that nutrition programs already exist to feed kids. So we're thinking about programs like school breakfast, lunch, after-school meals, summer meals. We know that there is not a shortage of food in our country. That's not where the problem is. However, we know that there is a problem with hunger in every community across our country. But at NoKidHungry, we feel very strongly that it's a solvable problem, and we feel that school meals are a really big part of that solution. So what we're working to do is to break down the barriers that exist between the kids in need and the programs that already exist to make sure, again, that kids are getting the nutritious meals that they need to grow up and live healthy, successful lives. So at NoKidHungry, one of our priorities is school breakfast expansion. Right now, when we think about the school breakfast program, just 57 kids from low-income families participate in school breakfast for every 100 kids that participate in the school lunch program. And we're working to achieve 70% breakfast participation among these free and reduced price eligible lunch eaters. This is something that we call the breakfast gap. So why is this so important? When we think about breakfast, we know that hunger is more than an empty belly. We know that there are both short-term and long-term effects for kids not getting the nutrition that they need. We know that students who don't eat breakfast are hangry students. We know that there are, again, challenges that students who are struggling with hunger see. They oftentimes have more behavioral, emotional, and academic problems. They're more likely to be sick and to visit the nurse's office more, to be hospitalized. They experience symptoms like headaches, stomach aches more often than other students. And they oftentimes are not achieving as high academically. As Julie has already shared a little bit, we know that hungry kids can't learn. This is something that the research shows us, and it's also something that teachers like you tell us. We saw in a national survey that we did with teachers that 3 out of 4 educators reported that they regularly see students coming to school hungry. And many of those teachers, 57% of them actually, reported that they regularly use their own money to buy food for students. And on average, those teachers reported spending about $300 of their own money buying food for hungry students. So again, when we're thinking about it, we're thinking about the fact that, these kids are struggling to focus in class when they're thinking about being hungry. And it's, of course, making your jobs as educators a bit tougher when your students aren't fueled up to learn. So beyond that, we know that there, again, are both short and long-term effects of not eating breakfast, but we also know that there are positive effects of actually eating school breakfast. When kids eat school breakfast, schools see higher test scores, better attendance, and improved graduation rates. We've highlighted some of those figures here based on a analysis that NoKidHungry conducted in partnership with Deloitte that shows just how school breakfast can benefit students, both in and out of the classroom. So again, with all this talk about school breakfast, one of the challenges we see is that traditional breakfast in the cafeteria isn't always what's best. There are common barriers that prevent students from accessing school breakfast when it's served in the cafeteria before the start of the school day. Those barriers include things like students not arriving in time to eat before school. So perhaps the school bus ran late, or perhaps students rely on public transportation, which isn't always very reliable. Or perhaps the student was waiting for a parent or caregiver to get home from working a night shift, and that parent got home a little later than planned. We also know that unfortunately there's some stigma that school breakfast is for low-income students, and students who are hungry might feel uncomfortable seeking out their breakfast if they are concerned about what their peers might think about it. Something else we see is that middle and high school students may not be hungry first thing in the morning, but they might be hungry for breakfast a little later in the morning. Another common barrier is that the cafeteria is not convenient for students. This can kind of come in a number of different ways and forms. Perhaps students are entering the school building on the opposite side from where the cafeteria is located. Or perhaps the cafeteria doesn't have enough seating for all of the students in the school. or perhaps there are long lines. There are a number of reasons why the cafeteria environment might not be very student-friendly. And there might not be enough time for students to eat in the morning before class starts. So maybe students are arriving on time, but perhaps they have a number of things to do before they need to get to class. Something we also see is that students rather socialize with their friends. If students have to make a choice between going to the cafeteria and having breakfast, but perhaps they're able to hang out in another part of the school, like a gym or a courtyard with their friends, even if they're hungry, they might choose to do that instead. But there's good news, and that good news is that breakfast after the bell is a great solution to these common challenges. Breakfast after the bell is one of the names that refers to the concept of shifting the time that breakfast is served so that it's part of the school day, and it moves breakfast from the cafeteria to where students are, like classrooms and common areas. So I like to say that instead of asking the students to come to breakfast, we bring the breakfast to students. There are three effective models of breakfast after the bell. One of those models is breakfast in the classroom. Another of those models is grab-and-go breakfast, and the third model is second chance breakfast. In a moment, we're going to dive deeper into what these models look like. But what we can see here is the results of an analysis that our colleagues on our measurement planning and analysis team conducted. And this data reflects over 2,000 schools from 14 states across the country. And what it shows us is that when schools offer breakfast in the classroom, on average, they're reaching 88% of those students that are participating in the school lunch program that are free and reduced price eligible. So if you recall earlier, we talked a little bit about that breakfast gap. So we see that the data supports that breakfast in the classroom is really effective in connecting more students with school breakfast. And we also see success with grab and go and second chance breakfast, reaching more of those students than when traditional cafeteria breakfast is served. So we're going to take a moment to kind of dive a little bit deeper into each of these models. So with breakfast in the classroom, as its name suggests, breakfast is offered or served and eaten in the classroom. This model, and actually all of the breakfast after the bell models, are really great because while there are a number of consistent best practices across the board, all of these models can be adapted to best meet the needs and wants of an individual school or district. So thinking about breakfast in the classroom in that context, school nutrition staff will prepare and pack breakfast items in the cafeteria or central kitchen. That tends to happen either before the school day starts or perhaps the day before. And then kind of thinking about, whatever practice or procedure works best for a given school. The breakfasts are transported to the classroom either by school nutrition staff, teachers on their way, into the school in the morning might grab the breakfast, or this is a great opportunity to engage students as leaders. The breakfasts are oftentimes transported in rolling bags or in crates that make them easy to move from the cafeteria to the classroom. And then teachers or students track the number of students that participate in school breakfast and send that information back to the cafeteria. Cleanup is actually pretty easy. As long as there's a strong routine in place, students clean up their designated areas, and any breakfast trash is removed from the classroom. Here we have some photos for those of you that might not be as familiar with breakfast in the classroom to kind of give a better understanding of what this looks like. So if we look at the photo on the left, we have an example of some pretty commonly used insulated bags. What we typically see is that the blue ones indicate that those are cold items, where you might have milk or fruit packed in those. And the red bags are typically insulated to keep things warm, where you might have the breakfast entree in there. The other images show just a different variety of ways that the breakfast can be transported. But again, whatever meets, the needs and wants of a particular school. It also reflects that, each school might have different resources available. But either way, it's a pretty smooth and easy process to get that breakfast from the cafeteria to the classroom, where students can begin their day by sharing that breakfast time together. Teachers can begin business as usual. And it's a really great way to get everyone started kind of on an even playing field and get everyone ready to learn. We're now going to talk a little bit about grab and go to the classroom, which is another model of breakfast after the bell. And this refers to a practice when breakfast is offered or served from one or more central locations in the school. This can either be with carts that are placed in high traffic areas or sometimes via a quick cafeteria line. But what this looks like is students grabbing their breakfast and taking it to the classroom and eating it there. Similarly to breakfast in the classroom, the school nutrition staff prep the breakfast items in the cafeteria or the central kitchen, if that's the district model. The prep occurs in the morning before school starts or the day before. And the components of a reimbursable breakfast are packed onto those carts. Oftentimes what we see here is that there's a point of sale system that's on the cart where the cafeteria staff can go ahead and have the students enter in their information and keeping track right there of what students are participating in the program. Cleanup here as well can be really smooth with a strong plan in place. Students can clean up their designated areas and remove any breakfast trash from the classroom. And here we have some photos of what grab and go looks like. Again, something that can be totally adapted based on what resources are available. You see here quite a variety of different grab and go carts. And this is something that often varies as well based on school size. Some of the kind of more high-end carts you see here are used when we're talking about really large schools that are, have enrollments of, a few thousand students and perhaps have more expansive campuses that really need to be covered. But you can see here, schools make this work with all different, types of carts. It can just be your standard, two-tier gray utility cart out of the closet. Or something, with a few more bells and whistles. But either way, we're looking at bringing breakfast to where the students are, either, that entryway where they're getting off the bus, those busy hallways that are leading to the classrooms, just really making it easy for students to participate in breakfast as they're going about their usual morning routine. And lastly, we're going to talk about second chance breakfast. This is when breakfast is served between first and second periods or during mid-morning break. If you recall, one of the barriers that I mentioned as a common challenge to students participating in breakfast when it's served before school is that older students might not be hungry first thing in the morning. So second chance breakfast is often most appealing or most successful in middle and high schools. And this can be served in a variety of different models. So it can either be grab and go to the classroom, where there again are those carts that are placed in busy areas for students to grab a breakfast during that passing period. Or in some cases, we see schools opt to reopen the cafeteria, where students are given a break to eat in the cafeteria before they have class. What's, again, great with second chance breakfast and the other models as well is that a school can decide what works best with their schedule. So looking at when the school day starts, when lunch is offered, how many lunch periods there are, they can really find something that best meets the needs of the overall school while ensuring that students have maximum access to the school breakfast program. And here again, we have a couple of other photos that shows just again those two models and how they can be put in place, but later in the morning. to catch students when they might be getting hungry. So we also know that there tend to be some common concerns or common myths about breakfast after the bell that we wanted to take some time today to dispel a little bit. Overall, we know that breakfast after the bell, when implemented correctly, will not take away from your instructional time. It will not place unnecessary burden on teachers. It won't make a mess of your classroom. It provides nutritious meals to your students, and it's paid for by federal funds, not general school funding. You can see here that we have a resource linked. If you're either accessing the slides right now in real time or when you get the recording after the webinar, I encourage you to check out this resource and the others that are going to be hyperlinked in the rest of this webinar. There's a lot of wonderful additional information that might be of interest to you or others in your school. So please go ahead and do check that out. So one of the questions that we often get is, what is happening in the classroom when breakfast after the bell is going on? When we think about students eating breakfast in the classroom, either if it's the breakfast in the classroom model or grab-and-go breakfast that's been taken to the classroom, we see this process take about 15 minutes on average, and that includes cleanup time. And what happens during this time? We kind of say that that's business as usual. So students might begin their morning work. It can, a do now activity, a power up. Teachers may take attendance. There might be announcements for the day ahead. There could be student meetings happening. There might be some social emotional learning lessons. Really, it's something that does not disrupt classroom routine when there is a strong plan in place. And we actually hear anecdotally that teachers report that they can gain instructional time back with breakfast after the bell because there are fewer behavioral disruptions and visits to the school nurse, as well as decreased tardiness and absenteeism. So as we highlighted earlier, thinking about those benefits of breakfast, students are in their seats, they're fueled up with a nutritious breakfast, and they're ready to focus on their task at hand. We also highlighted a little earlier the financial weight that teachers can often feel when they're purchasing snacks for hungry students. With teachers in our survey reporting that they spend an average of $300 per year of their own money to feed hungry students in their classroom. By boosting participation in the school breakfast program, teachers don't need to use their own money to combat food insecurity. We're fortunate to have these programs already in place. And if we work together, we can maximize access to make sure that students in need are participating in the programs that are oftentimes already available in the school. And speaking of money, school breakfast is funded by the district's nutrition budget. The school meals program is intended to be a self-supporting program, and this budget is separate from the district's general fund. Schools that participate in the school breakfast program are eligible to receive federal reimbursements to support their program. So what that means is that for every eligible school breakfast that's served to students, your school will receive a reimbursement that comes down to your school via the USDA to help your school with the operating expenses associated with the program. So what that means is that the more kids that eat school breakfast, the more revenue that your school or your district is able to bring in to continue making that program a success. We have a really great resource here that gives more detail and traces the path that school breakfast funding takes from Congress to the cafeteria. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, or if that's something that you've heard questions or concerns about in your school or district, I encourage you to take a peek at that. It's a pretty user-friendly resource and it has some commonly asked questions on it as well. Another concern that we sometimes hear is that breakfast after the bell will lead to mess or trash issues. However, these concerns can be really easily overcome by developing a smart system involving the school nutrition staff and custodians at your school. And overall, when students and staff are trained to properly dispose of breakfast items, breakfast after the bell is a simple and clean experience. Oftentimes, we see that students are more careful with food in their classrooms than when in the cafeteria. And again, this is a really great way to engage your students as leaders to help with classroom cleanup. You can have students understand what their individual roles are in cleaning up their desks after breakfast. And you can also have leaders that are assigned with tasks that support the classroom, like being the student who takes the trash bag into the hallway or similar tasks like that. And here we have another resource specifically for educators. This is a teacher guide to classroom setup and cleanup that highlights some tips for how you can ensure that breakfast in your classroom is smooth and mess-free. One other thing we wanted to highlight about school breakfast is that it's actually healthier than most people realize. Sometimes we hear some concern about school breakfast, what's being served. So it's good to know that all foods and beverages that are served as part of the school breakfast program must meet nutrition guidelines supported by science and set by the USDA, that is the United States Department of Agriculture. And while menu items rotate typically to provide students with variety, school breakfast will always include a milk, a fruit, and whole grains. And even though breakfast items provided to students at school sometimes look like the same items found in stores, items served as part of a school breakfast often have more whole grains and less sugar, sodium, fat, and calories. There's a great example of that on the resource that's linked here, which is called School Breakfast Healthier Than You Think, which highlights in more detail what the nutritional guidelines are around the school breakfast program, and also shows an example of a breakfast item that does look like something that you can buy in the grocery store, but especially made to be compliant with the guidelines around school breakfast. Something that sometimes also can come up is a concern related to breakfast after the bell causing overeating or being associated with the risk of obesity. But there's actually research that shows that there is no association between offering breakfast in the classroom and an increased caloric intake. And actually what we see in thinking about what we just discussed around the nutritional quality of school breakfast, that school breakfast participants are actually more likely to consume diets that are adequate or exceed standards for important vitamins and minerals, and they have a better overall diet than those who eat breakfast elsewhere or skip breakfast altogether. And as we think about you as our audience today, we know that teachers play an instrumental role in creating a culture of school breakfast. Studies have found that when teachers promote the breakfast program, students feel less stigma for participating and are more likely to consume a meal. So regardless of how school breakfast is being served in your school today, if it's traditional cafeteria breakfast, if it's breakfast in the classroom, grab-and-go breakfast, there are a number of ways that you can support the program and encourage your students to participate. Sometimes we refer to these things as nudges, but thinking about how you can just simply remind students to pick up a school breakfast. When you see your students in the hallway in the morning, you can just ask them, hey, did you grab your breakfast today? Or even better, if you happen to know what's on the menu, you can excitedly share with them, hey, did you have breakfast today? I heard there's French toast on the menu. Eating school breakfast with your students. If you've never chatted with your school nutrition staff, I encourage you to do that. Find out if there's an option to purchase an adult breakfast, and show your students that it's something that, it's not just for them, and it's something that you will, gladly enjoy yourself as well. And think about other ways that you can promote school breakfast in your classrooms. If you're writing announcements each day, perhaps you can add to those announcements, what's going to be on the breakfast menu tomorrow. If there's any type of closing you do at the end of your day, could you make that part of your verbal announcement as well? Is there a way to incorporate that into your morning activity? I could probably come up with a few more examples, but I know that the audience I'm talking to, that you all have the mind far more creative than I do in that regard. But we also have a resource here, which highlights a number of other school breakfast promotion strategies that a variety of people in the school setting can take to encourage their students to participate. And you are not alone in this. NoKidHungry has a variety of resources to support you in any breakfast expansion endeavors that you take on. We offer a number of webinars, as has been highlighted in this webinar today. We also have a number of resources and toolkits where available to provide you with technical assistance and support. And we also often have grant opportunities available. And you all are so fortunate to have an in-state advocate, your peer, Julie, who is just such a phenomenal resource, and we're so glad to be able to work with her. And with that, I want to start transitioning us over to questions. I think some of you have started using the chat box already, but if you haven't already, please go ahead, type your question in, and we'll take a look at those. We will do our best to answer everything in the time that we have right now, but if there's a question that comes in and we're not able to get to it, we will follow up by email. So please go ahead, don't be shy, type those questions in, and we will take a look at those in a moment.
Thank you, Kelly. What a great wealth of information. I know there are so many questions I get when I'm visiting with teachers and with schools across the state that you really helped cover in this presentation. So really excited to share this wealth of information with everyone who's on. So we do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to handle the first two, and then I'm going to kick it over to Kelly to maybe help me out with the last one. So one of the first questions is, do I have any specific instances of students who were hungry early in the morning, and what was their situation for not being able to get access before school breakfast? So yes, there are several instances. I want to talk about this last year in my high school. So my high school serves breakfast in the cafeteria, traditional before the bell, but also has a second chance breakfast. But I taught an advanced placement course, and I had several students who would come to school, as many high school students do. They rolled out of bed right before school started and got to school just as the bell was ringing and missed breakfast before the bell. And we had to be on point in my AP literature class. So I was noticing, and our second chance breakfast didn't happen until after first period, and I was noticing that kids were still asleep. They were not ready to learn. We could not engage in classroom discussion. I could not get them to participate. So I went to my school nutrition manager in my building and asked her if I could do breakfast in my classroom. And she was always looking for ways to think outside the box. So we started breakfast in my classroom. My students placed their orders. We had a couple of kids who would go to the cafeteria as soon as the bell rang and pick up breakfast the next day. We would do bell work at the beginning of class while they were eating breakfast. I was able to build relationships with them. We did check-ins. I was able to really help individually with some students who were not getting some of the concepts from the day before or the night's homework before. So really, it wasn't that my students weren't able to eat breakfast before school at their home, or that they didn't have access to breakfast after the bell, but they needed that extra substance before school started, or while school was starting, before we started in this advanced course. So that breakfast in the classroom, even though it's traditionally offered in an elementary school, in my high school class, was critical to making sure that my students were ready to learn and that they knew that I was tending to their needs, and sometimes needs that they didn't even know that they had. So that's one example. Another example that I find really important is that I have twin 10-year-old daughters, and they're in the 5th grade. But a few years ago, they had a teacher who, in all of their elementary school, all of the kids eat breakfast in the classroom. And I loved that their teacher a couple of years ago was able to give my daughters something that my husband and I could not offer them, and that was a family meal. So she started the day off with breakfast around the table, and they would share things that they had done the day before that they really liked. They talked about activities they were excited about in the coming day. She was able to teach them math lessons by calculating calories and nutritional values. She was also able to teach them some informational text reading, that was able to read a food label, able to look at marketing around food and around the different types of food that they were eating in class, and she was able to build relationships. So it did not matter whether the student came from a household that was able to, either because of time or finances, offer breakfast before school started, or that they were not. So that she was able to level the playing field. It was an equity issue for her classroom that all of her students started the day off with a nutritious family meal that was also instructional, informative, and long-lasting. That each of her students knew that she cared about them, body, mind, and soul, before they got started on their day. Another example that I'd like to share is about my school's school nutrition director. I sometimes will go into the cafeteria and serve breakfast with her before school starts. And I think it's really phenomenal that a lot of times these ladies and gentlemen who work in school nutrition, they are at the heart of what happens in a classroom and what happens in a school every single day. Our school nutrition director and all of our school nutrition staff, they know nearly every student's name who walks into that cafeteria. They know who they are, they know what they like, they know when they are having a good day or a bad day. Sometimes they are the first adult that these students see, and it's super important that students know that it's not just teachers who are caring for them, but every single person in that school whose entire goal is to make sure that these kids grow up in the most healthy, productive way that they can, and that it can start with a nutritious meal, either in the cafeteria, after the bell, in the classroom, in a grab and go to a commons area, whatever it is. We are all on the same team, making sure these kids are getting their day off to a right start. So let's see. Oh, I think Kelly talked also about what students or what teachers can do to help students know that breakfast is important. And one of those things is to eat breakfast with your kids. I love chicken biscuit day in my school. It's one of the best things that I eat. It's totally not on my diet, but I love it. And so I made sure that I would order an extra chicken biscuit for my classroom when we had chicken biscuit day for breakfast, and would make sure that my kids ate it too. It's just, we all talked about how that was our favorite day. So eat breakfast with your kids. It's really good. Even if it's not on your diet, go for it. Trying to think. Okay, so another question was, let's see, have we had success in getting legislators to introduce bills on this in the North Carolina General Assembly? And actually, yes. This past year, we're really excited that if our North Carolina budget passes in full at some point in the hopefully very near future, if it hasn't done so already, I've not been on the news today, that there is a bill that was offered and that made it into the budget that would reduce prices for students who paid reduced price for meals, that they would not have to pay that reduced price. Oftentimes, students who are free lunch and free breakfast can get food, and that's awesome. But students who are reduced price for breakfast and lunch, sometimes those are our working poor, and those students can't often afford that reduced priced meal. So for our North Carolina General Assembly to recognize this and know that those are sometimes our hungriest students, that we can cover that cost for that meal for breakfast and for lunch, is going to go such a long way to make sure that all of our students are successful and that we can get rid of that barrier altogether. I know that there are other states and sometimes districts who are able to legislate or create policy that allows all of their students to eat free breakfast and or free lunch. My district in particular is one of the districts in North Carolina that is a CEP district, that's community eligibility provision, and that allows, because of our free and reduced price eligible students and a variety of other things too that go into calculating that, all of our students, regardless of their socioeconomic background, can eat free breakfast and free lunch. There are many districts across our state that school boards and district policy help make this happen, either through CEP or through universal free, so that our students are able to eat at no cost, regardless of their socioeconomic background. I know there are a couple of people who are on the webinar today. Their districts are offering universal free breakfast to several of their schools so that more students can eat. So we're really appreciative for being able to break down that barrier. It does make breakfast as part of the instructional day a little bit easier to manage in terms of school nutrition staff and teachers. There are a couple other questions. Kelly, do you want to try to tackle some of those?
Sure, yeah. I appreciate the questions that have come in. Some are a little intertwined here, just so you know what we're looking at in our back end here. And also, before I get to these as well, if you still have questions and you haven't entered them in, please go ahead and do so. Within reason, there's no question that's off base. So please, if there's anything that you're interested in knowing more about, or concerns that you've had or challenges that you're looking at help to address, please go ahead and ask. But I think, one of the things is, we've talked a bit about how, there are efforts to expand access to school breakfast, and we're really thinking of those students that, might come from low-income families, and that cost may be a barrier. But looking at one of the parts of these questions, I think it's also an important reminder that breakfast can benefit all families, regardless of what their income status is. We know for many, if not most families, that time before the school day can be very hectic, getting everyone dressed and out the door, and who's getting ready for school and who's getting ready for work, and, who walked the dog or didn't walk the dog. There's a lot happening there. So we know that breakfast is something that can save all families money. It can save all families time. We really want to think about how school breakfast can benefit all students. Julie talked about how expanding access to breakfast, and also these models that bring breakfast and make it a part of the school day, really help make breakfast more about community, more about students starting their day sharing a meal together. So I just wanted to take a second to, kind of highlight that as well, and thinking about how it's something that can benefit all of your students, not just your students that might be in need from an economic perspective. Trying to look here. Okay, we have a question that just came in on what model have we found works best in high schools. I would say we oftentimes see the grab and go or second chance model being best, or I'll say most popular in high schools. That is not to say that breakfast in the classroom does not work in those schools. This is again something that is fairly individualized, thinking about a school schedule and the total enrollment. So we have some resources as well as some great support available in Julie to walk any interested school and kind of figuring out what's the best model. But I've seen a lot of high schools be successful with that grab and go model where students, again, in middle and high school that are, entering the school, they're doing all the things that students do in the morning. They're stopping at lockers, they're unpacking their bags, they're, dropping things off to the office, all those things that are happening in the morning. And now, they don't have to go out of their way for breakfast. They don't have to, walk away from their friend group. Breakfast is right there on a grab and go cart for them to grab and go with as part of their normal morning routine. And similarly, thinking about that second chance model, if students are getting to school and, they had just gotten out of bed not too long ago, or they're not that hungry, or perhaps they have one of the later lunch periods as part of the schedule. That second chance model where breakfast is served a little later, either by having kids go back to the cafeteria or again, grab and go, just putting the breakfast where the kids are, can be really successful. And we've seen that work in middle and high schools across the country with a lot of success as well, right in North Carolina.
Yeah, I would say I see a lot of second chance breakfast and grab and go to the classroom or to a common area as being most popular in high schools and also I think in middle schools. And breakfast in the classroom mostly in elementary schools, although grab and go to the classroom is something else I'm seeing a lot more this year, myself personally in elementary schools. I also wanted to circle back a little bit about this question around have we had policy or bills around breakfast in North Carolina, and add something else that NoKidHungry North Carolina and the National NoKidHungry team are working with the school nutrition team and Dr. Lynn Harvey and her team out of the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction this year to work alongside the North Carolina State School Board to develop some policy, some metrics, and some forecasting for what we can do to close opportunity and access gaps in North Carolina. And we're really excited about how that is going to work and be an awesome way for us to see breakfast as part of the instructional day as a way to close opportunity gaps for all students and really addressing a lot of things like a lot of that data around math, around chronic absenteeism, and really about school culture, engagement, and helping our students know that all of their needs are important to us, not just their curriculum needs.
And I think I'll add to a question that came in somewhere in this group of questions. I was asking about kind of our choice to prioritize school breakfast and thinking about the other child nutrition programs that are available. And part of that is because we know what works when it comes to expanding access to school breakfast. Looking at some of the data that we highlighted during today's webinar, breakfast after the bell is effective at increasing access to school breakfast. When the programs are implemented correctly, student participation in the breakfast program increases and typically increases significantly. But I do want to acknowledge that NoKidHungry is also doing really important and exciting work around summer meals and after school meals to school nutrition programs that are also very critical to fighting childhood hunger. But we recognize that there's a bit more innovation that's needed to come up with solutions to connect more kids with those programs. So we're working hard as an organization and also closely with partners on program and policy solutions that connect more kids with those important programs as well. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any final questions that they want to slip in here to the chat box, Otherwise, we also are going to share Julie's information. And maybe while those final questions come in, Julie can end us by explaining how you could be a resource in North Carolina.
Yeah, I'm really excited this year to be a teacher on loan from Rutherford County Schools, and really grateful for my school system for allowing me to work with NoKidHungry this year. It's been an exciting, I don't know, Kelly, like 14 months that I've been associated with y'all, either through, it has, I think, from August of last year.
It feels much longer, but in a very good way.
In a very good way. Yeah, so child nutrition and hunger has definitely been something that's been important to me my whole life, especially my career as an educator. I'm just really glad to have been introduced to y'all by my friend Freeburg McKinney, who was the state teacher of the year last year. He invited me to come with him to a luncheon that you all were sponsoring for district. So I'm really excited that this year my district has allowed me to do this very important work in North Carolina, and that is to be your champion and to help you learn how you can offer breakfast as part of your instructional day to all of your students, and to make sure that I can help you break down those barriers for students in their educational day and what you do for them. So I have been traveling around the state this year these last few months working with teachers and schools to implement programs, to think about what works best for them, to look at their schools and try to find the best solution for breakfast. So the first thing I would ask you to do is to reach out to your school nutrition director in your district, because there may be things that are happening in your district that you don't know about. Tell them that you were on this webinar or that you've had access to it and you've been introduced to me and you'd like to talk about what we can do in your district. Then reach out to me, send me an email, shoot me a text or a phone number that is my personal phone number, and let's talk and find out ways that you can be a breakfast champion in your district. I'm really excited about the work we're doing in North Carolina. I feel like we're running at Mach 10 sometimes, but we're super excited about making sure that we can close this breakfast gap in North Carolina and make sure that all kids have access to a healthy start for their school day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julie. On behalf of all of us at NoKidHungry, we are just so excited and so grateful to have Julie on board championing this important work in North Carolina. Thank you again to all of you who took time out of your afternoon to join us for today's webinar. We will be sure to share the webinar recording with you. Also be on the lookout for some future webinars that we plan to host for educators around this important topic. And again, just another reminder, send Julie an email and give her a call, send her a text. She is here to help. She's a wonderful resource. But thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye.